Okay, I think we can start. Welcome everyone again. This is the CRISPR Bright Spots event series, our special episode, our first episode for the year 2022, on weathering governance and certainty of large-scale conservation projects. We are very excited to have you with us today. And I think this will be a really interesting episode. We have this is the practitioners focused part of the episode for the Oceans Conference in June. We probably do a high level event with focusing on politicians, but this will kickstart the conversation. And we have a really interesting panel for you today, and it's going to be very interesting because I think we're going to discuss what could be controversial issues in terms of maintaining things through political administrations. Is always a touchy subject, but I think the types of experts we have today to guide us in the conversation will be very constructive and I think very interesting. I think I'm looking forward to hear what our expert presenters have to tell us today. I'll be your MC for this evening's program or morning, depending on where you're from in the world. And I want to kick things off with our first opening speaker, Mrs. Yoko Watanabe, who is the global manager of the Jeff UNDP Small Grants Program, who is our main partner in our Bright Spots series events in general. Yoko is a great friend of GLSPA. She's always on hand for every event we have, and she always puts things in context really well. So I don't want to speak too much. I'll let her do her thing. And Yoko, can you please start us off with some opening remarks? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Javal, and all the distinguished speakers and panelists today, and all the participants in the scene here in the Zoom virtual world. It's really a delight to be here. The Small Grants Program has partnered with GLSPA and Micronesia Conservation Trust on the Island Bright Spot initiative for a year now. This is really to foster island-led local action into global coalition and bring it to the global forums. And with the financial support from the government of Italy, the aim of this initiative is to recognize and scale up and replicate good practices among local communities across the islands and small island development states. The initiative focuses on the island bright spots and connecting them to global policy processes so that they can best illustrate the island needs, solutions, and opportunities. It focuses on implementation of the multilateral environmental agreements, such as the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, the Paris Agreement, and the Sustainable Development Goals. And the activities will demonstrate concrete local and tangible progress on Sustainable Development Goals, implementation of the Samoa pathways, as well as connecting the local to global between the political leadership and local implementators in a range of islands. We always see that the great experience and the stories from the local communities really makes a huge difference into the political dialogue and making things more to a reality and have a really more insightful policy dialogue in that regard. And we've done that also recently at the Climate COP and also at the Biodiversity COP together with GLSPA and the partners here. So under a strong global island network, the island success is built upon the real work, the bright spots. And investment in these island bright spots provide examples of the solutions that have the potential to scale up and replicate and really build the resilience in sustainable island communities through innovative partnerships. And today's session is focused on the bright spots on the large-scale marine protected area at the provincial, national, and international scales. And as we see, large-scale marine protected area is a key element to enable the protect 30% of the world ocean, which is a key target of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework that has been discussed at the CBD COP15. And the large protected areas is also a key approach to achieve the target under the Sustainable Development Goals, the Sustainable Development Goals 14 on the life below water. And so Small Grants Program as part of the UNDP is really dedicating to make sure that these targets are met and implement from the local side. And the ocean and marine environment are essential to the sustainable life, as we all know. And it provides a critical ecosystem services, the economy is built on that, and the livelihood that relies on. And so the small island development states that are actually a large ocean states really have a lot to contribute and actually provide that solutions on the ground. But we all know that the ocean is significantly threatened by climate change, pollutions, and overfishing, to name the few. And the conservation initiative to address these issues in the ocean is actually quite limited compared to the terrestrial cousin. So what we are trying to sort of highlight today here is how we can further strengthen the management of the large-scale marine protected areas. And we also know that there are quite a lot of challenges in terms of a long-term commitment for managing these areas, and financial and also political commitment to do so. And from the small grant side, even though small, we are starting from the local area. And so, for example, in Jamaica, the St. Mary's Fishermen Cooperative have developed and protecting a 74-acre Oraco Basso Bay fishing sanctuary with a community. And this is protecting the sea turtles and the corals with community-based co-management. And these lessons can be scaled up to the large-scale marine protected areas. And actually, I've been part of a member of an advisory committee of a legacy landscape fund, which is actually trying to do the same on the terrestrial protected areas where there is a need for perpetual sort of financing and commitment from the local and national government to protect these areas. And there are efforts to maintain these places more in the long term. And I think the marine protected area requires more concerted efforts among us to see what we can do to build on the commitment from the countries and provide that necessary support, not as a project basis, but more on a long-term sustainability issue. So I really look forward to hearing everybody here from the panelists what type of activities are ongoing right now, and see how we can support from the small grant side as well. And we're actually celebrating our 30th anniversary this year of the small grants program. We have supported over 25,000 projects in 128 countries now. And really the SIDS, the small island development countries, and the island states are really core of our support and heart of our initiative. So we really look forward to our continued partnership with GLSPA and all of you here, and have a fruitful dialogue. So thank you again. Back to you, Jabal.
Thank you, Yoko. And thanks for sharing those great examples. And happy birthday, SGP. 30 years is no joke. So really happy to see the work you all have been doing and continue to do. And we hope for many, many, many more years of SGP providing the support that they have to islands everywhere. Our next opening speaker hails from the Blue Nature Alliance, which is a very, very special partner specifically for this episode. This topic is basically their brainchild because they're in the business of establishing large-scale marine protected areas, and they know that it's long-term work, and the way they do it is very special. It's very participatory. It's very from the ground up, working with communities and stakeholders. And so the answering the question of how to maintain these initiatives over political administrations is key for them doing their job successfully. And we really thank them for bringing this into the ether, this idea into the ether, and letting us explore it some more. So without further ado, we will be joined for some opening remarks by the Vice President of Blue Nature and the co-lead for implementation Blue Nature Alliance at Conservation International, Ms. Laure Katz. She's an ocean scientist and globally focused conservation practitioner with over 15 years of experience internationally and domestically. But besides the strong scientific credentials and capabilities, she also has a proven track record in strategic program design, execution, resource mobilization, and program sustainability. So thank you, Laure, and please take the floor.
Thank you, Jabal, and everybody for joining this conversation. So I probably don't need to convince anybody here that setting aside parts of the ocean as protected areas is critical to build resilience in the face of climate change, to replenish fisheries, safeguard biodiversity, and to help ensure that communities like those on island nations who depend on the ocean for their livelihoods and food security can face the future with confidence. Over the last few decades, there's been a really encouraging amount of momentum towards conserving and sustainably managing our ocean at increasingly large scales. And we're seeing island nations often at the forefront of that and leaders in that movement. And we believe we're on the cusp of a historic shift in attitudes towards an interest in the ocean. This momentum is incredibly important because while the current goal under the Convention of Biological Diversity is to protect 10% of the world's oceans, there's a growing scientific consensus that to ensure our ocean's resiliency to climate change, the world needs to conserve a minimum of 30% of the world's ocean by 2030. So the Blue Nature Alliance was born from that collective and urgent goal. To improve and accelerate large-scale ocean conservation, hopefully building momentum towards the global target, the hopeful global target of 30%. So like many ocean conservation advocates and practitioners, like many of you, we put a lot of time thinking into how we bring different elements, not only to help support the creation of new ocean conservation and protected areas, but also what's going to ensure the durability of large-scale ocean conservation efforts over time. We know from experience that designating, planning, and establishing, and then implementing large-scale ocean conservation is a journey, oftentimes with steps forward and sometimes steps backwards. But it's generally an accepted rule or believed to be that once established, a large-scale MPA is going to operate in perpetuity. Unfortunately, conservation history has demonstrated that this isn't always the case. And in fact, over the last 15 years, there have been at least 6 countries that have enacted 43 specific cases of downsizing, downgrading, or degazetting of marine protected areas, reducing the efficacy and protection in over 1 million square kilometers of oceans, approximately the size of South Africa. And we know that right now, some discussions are ongoing in nations right now considering other steps backwards in our movement towards ocean conservation. So as a community, we rarely talk about the fact that one of the universal factors that affects every large-scale marine protected area is election cycles, and the fact that throughout its life, large-scale marine protected areas will be managed and governed through successive ministers and national leaders. And in the best case scenario, this still requires a reorientation and managing changes in the legislative and executive power balance, which I'm pretty sure all of us who are in this field have gone through and navigated at least once. But in the worst case scenario, as political polarization increases in many countries, political shifts can lead to efforts to dismantle conservation progress, particularly those that are connected to political rivals. So today we're here to talk about how, as a conservation community, we can help support the durability of large-scale ocean conservation within that context of political uncertainty and change. So on behalf of the Blue Nature Alliance, I'm incredibly grateful to GLSPA for convening us today. I'm grateful to our speakers who are going to offer lessons and perspectives on this topic from a variety of different experiences. And I'm really grateful to each of you ahead of time for the contributions that you're going to make in this conversation. Each of our perspectives is going to be incredibly valuable. At the Blue Nature Alliance, we're committed to supporting more opportunities for open dialogue, lesson exchange, and shared learning, because we believe it's absolutely essential if we're going to grow as a community, adapt to new changes and shocks, and make sure that the work that we're doing leads to equitable and durable outcomes for oceans and island communities. So with that, I'll turn it back over, and I'm just really excited to engage in the conversation and learn along with you about hopefully some of the wisdom that is generated in this session. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Laure, for really bringing home how crucial having these conversations are. The need for it to be frank, to be honest, to be really probing in order to find real solutions. And yeah, thank you for just contextualizing that so well. And we're going to go straight into it with our practitioner side of things, who will be our main presenters today. And I want to start off with a guy who needs no introduction, really. He has been serving on the GLSPA board for many years. He's a senior leader with over 20 years management experience in natural resource conservation. ecosystem-based adaptation and sustainable livelihoods development. He is the executive director of the Micronesia Conservation Trust and was responsible for managing and spearheading its growth and regionalization throughout Pacific. Mr. William Kostka. Willie has been, MCT has been his baby for like over 15 years, and he's really seen to the growth of the trust. And he's also been responsible for the stewardship and the fundraising for endowment to support the Micronesia Challenge, which he will speak to a lot today as well. MCT is our fiscal host. He's a strong fundraiser with a proven track record of balancing budgets, which is good for us. And he's a recipient of the Pew Marine Fellowship in 2006. So without further ado, Mr. William Kostka.
Thank you very much, Chapal, for that nice eulogy. And thank you guys for allowing me to come and speak to you today. On behalf of the leaders of Micronesia and the people of Micronesia, I want to talk a little bit about the Micronesia Challenge. As many of you know, it was established in 2006, and the leaders and the people of Micronesia committed to protecting 30% of our nearshore marine resources and 20% of our terrestrial resources by 2020. And in 2019, the leaders reaffirmed this commitment by increasing that commitment to 50% of our marine areas and 30%, and then expanded the goals of the Micronesia Challenge to include livelihoods, invasive species management and eradication, coastal fisheries, and other, complementing initiatives around the Micronesia Challenge, the original Micronesia Challenge initiative. And since the very beginning, we have been working to establish permanent local, national, and regional mechanisms that will help sustain the Micronesia Challenge. And so across the region, with the Republic of Palau, Republic of the Marshall Islands, the Federated States of Micronesia, Guam, and the Commonwealth of the Northern Marianas Islands, we've been working to establish these mechanisms, regional, national, and local mechanisms to sustain the Micronesia Challenge. And that's how we feel we've been successful in continuing to gain the leadership support since 2006. First, we created a regional steering committee that is represented by the focal points from each of the 5 jurisdictions. And that steering committee includes the Micronesia Conservation Trust, which is a financing mechanism for the Micronesia Challenge Endowment. And of course, a representative of the donor community, which is the Nature Conservancy. And MCT was selected because it had been around and had established a track record in handling finances and providing grants to local communities across. So it was the decision to select MCT was easy for the leaders to decide on. And then, of course, the regional office was established as an intergovernmental organization in Palau with a coordinator. And then we placed protected area network coordinators at the local, state, and national levels across Micronesia. So those are permanent positions now in the government. And then there's the regional support team, which most of our organizations that are here on this conference are part of. And that's the group that provides some of the financial and technical support to the Micronesia Challenge. One of the things that was also part of the Micronesia Challenge was to establish sustainable financing mechanisms around it. So in 2002, we developed the Micronesia Challenge Sustainable Finance Plan. And that looked at what government budgets were available towards the Micronesia Challenge grants that were coming in either through the government or with non-government organizations and local financing mechanisms such as the Palau tourism or green fee. And of course, the establishment of the regional Micronesia Challenge endowment, which is currently is at $27 million. And then, you know, to maintain the momentum we have actually, and to meet the new commitment by the leaders, we're currently updating the Sustainable Finance Plan. We are now working with all the jurisdictions to enhance or improve the Sustainable Finance Plan, which we hope will be rolled out sometime this year when it's completed by each of the jurisdictions. And one of the other things that we've also established is the permanent monitoring mechanisms for the Micronesia Challenge. And that includes permanent databases with the Palau International Coral Reef Center and the University of Guam's Marine Lab, which are now churning out the information that we need and doing the analysis for us to be able to gauge how the interventions that we're doing with the Micronesia Challenge Initiative is actually making a difference for the people. So we're looking at not just the biophysical, you know, results, but also looking at the socioeconomic results. We have established permanent internship programs, fellowship programs, and scholarship programs, as well as other capacity building support that's actually developing and maintaining the people that we need to continue to support this. And we're very happy to say that we have, you know, through our internship and scholarship programs, we are bringing back Micronesian students, young champions back to Micronesia who are leading programs across the region in all the jurisdictions. And that's with the Bill Rayner Micronesia Challenge Scholarship Program and the support from the Association of the Pacific, the Association for the Promotion of International Cooperation from Japan and the Soviet University. And so, you know, with all these permanent mechanisms in place, we have actually survived over 18 administrative changes. So that's when we changed presidents or governors, and the Micronesia Challenge continues to survive. And we feel that it's because of the permanent mechanisms that we put in place and the fact that the Micronesia Challenge is a regional initiative. So we pick up champions as we lose champions in every different administration. And right now, one of our strongest champions is also going to be on our panel, who's Governor Guerrero. And we're very happy that she's helping to push the Micronesia Challenge forward along with the other leaders. And so I will end my presentation here and then hope to be able to answer questions during the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Willie. And yes, Willie will be joining the discussion panel later, so you can post your questions there, but you can also put your questions in the chat and he may get them in the chat as well. We have one more presenter and he's joined us now. He hails from Australia. He's an adjunct senior research fellow at the ARC Center for Coral Reef Studies in the James Cook University, Mr. John Day. Dr. John commenced his professional career in terrestrial protected areas in 1975. In 1986, he joined the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority. For the following 28 years, John was involved in many aspects of planning and managing the Great Barrier Reef. For the last 16 years of his career, John was one of the directors at the Marine Park Authority, variously responsible for biodiversity conservation, park planning, heritage, particularly World Heritage, indigenous partnerships, the rezoning of the park, and commencing the first GBR Outlook report. So a wealth of experience. I'm very excited to have him here today. since retiring from the authority, his post-career PhD has analyzed the reasons behind the success of the rezoning. And more recently, he has focused his efforts on applying and refining the Climate Vulnerability Index, a rapid assessment tool applied in many World Heritage properties. So I'm sure he has a lot of lessons that are very relevant to us in this forum. And John, over to you. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, Jabal. Hopefully you can hear me. And can you see my slides, please?
Yes, we hear you loud and clear, and we see your slides.
Thank you very much. As Jabal said, I'm going to talk about the Great Barrier Reef. For those of you who aren't aware, now I've got to work out how my slides are going to progress. Why won't they progress? Something's gone wrong with my slides. I apologize. I'm just going to close this down and try again. Sorry, guys. I may have to. Look, I'm just going to talk. I'm having problems with my slides. So Jabal mentioned I worked at the Great Barrier Reef. A very brief history of the Great Barrier Reef. Some of you will be aware it came about in the 1960s and 70s because of threats to the reef of things like oil drilling and limestone mining. As a result of those threats, we had a Royal Commission which led to a number of recommendations, one of which was to set up a thing called the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park and a thing called the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority, the agency to manage it. The agency's been in place now since 1975, so we've learned a lot of lessons over the number of years. One of the key lessons that we've learned is to have good information to help guide management. And if I can give an example of that, one of the things we have is very clear objectives in our legislation about what the marine park is about. So the primary objective in the legislation talks about the long-term protection and conservation of the environment, biodiversity and heritage values of the Great Barrier Reef region. Now, it's important to have that primary object, but the legislation then goes on to say, so far as consistent with that primary object, then allow for other uses, and that includes sustainable use. So very clearly, we have a hierarchy in our objectives, which again makes it very clear to decision makers how they should make decisions. Now, I'm not saying this is always followed to the letter of the law, but that is in the law. The other thing that we have that works very well is that we have clear cooperative arrangements between adjacent jurisdictions. The Great Barrier Reef is very large. It's about the size of many countries. It's about the size of, for example, Malaysia or Italy. And there are two governments involved in managing it. The federal or Commonwealth government manages the bulk of the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park, but also the state or Queensland government are heavily involved because they manage the intertidal waters between high water and low water. So there's many, many agencies, both state and federal, involved in the Great Barrier Reef, but the primary one is the federal government through the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority. In terms of governance and how it works, it's quite complex, and I won't try and, I had it as a slide, I apologize, and I'll make sure my slides are sent through the group to, so it can be circulated. But effectively, we have a complex arrangement dealing with the two governments. And one of the things that allows this to work effectively together is an intergovernmental agreement. Now that started in the late 70s, and today it's a very different document, but effectively the two parts of government adhere to the intergovernmental agreement. That agreement sets out how the two governments work together, how government agencies need to work together, and it's guided by a thing called the Ministerial Council. Over the years, the challenges in the Great Barrier Reef have changed, and I won't go through them all in detail, but the one I want to sort of talk about, the challenge, which I think has the most lessons for political aspects, is a rezoning of the Great Barrier Reef that happened in the period 99 to 2003. Again, I'm sorry you can't see my slides, but effectively this was a very comprehensive and a controversial zoning program that led to a complete rezoning of the entire Great Barrier Reef. So 344,000 square kilometres were rezoned, and 1/3 of that area ended up in no-take zones. Now, I want to talk about the importance of politics in this aspect of making policy, because policy is highly political. In our case, we had federal politics involved, we had federal state politics involved, and there were politics within the sectors. The key thing that led to the success, or there are a number of things, including the political engagement, but also the public engagement. And this was a huge part of the rezoning of the Great Barrier Reef. Very comprehensive program, well beyond the legislative requirements. For example, we ended up with 31,000 public written submissions that we had to analyse. And as a result of those submissions, there were huge changes between the initial draft plan that was prepared by the authority and the final plan. That public engagement was an important contributor to the political acceptance. So having assessed the overall zoning, there are 4 key success factors. One was having sound science as an underpinning. The second was having effective leadership. The third was having that effective public engagement. And the fourth was the political engagement, as I mentioned. When you look at those, and in my PhD, I analysed them, it actually turns out that the political was by far the most important. The politics depended on having, or depended on the public engagement. So the politicians looked at how the public were involved. The politicians looked at the science, and they were certainly guided in terms of leadership. We wouldn't have got the outcome in the political halls of Canberra, the national capital, without the political leadership of both our CEO at the time and the minister. So I want to stress the politics was absolutely fundamental, and without it, we wouldn't have got the outcome. So there are a number of lessons from the rezoning, but I think the one that I'm really keen to talk about is the politics. Just to finish off, and again, I apologize, this talk is a little bit disjointed because I'm literally talking from a piece of paper where I had some notes because I thought I was using my PowerPoint. But the key aspects I want to really stress, politics is important, but it's also, as we know, changeable. So how do we address the fact that, how do we lock in things so we can ensure that the conservation objectives are maintained in the long run? There are a number of ways we do that, and I'll go quickly through some of them. Things like, as I said, sound and clear legislation. Very clear to both the government and the opposition what are the objectives of the marine park. We have very clear guidance down through the different agencies about what their roles are. We have very clear guidance for agency staff, how they're meant to work. Things like when the rezoning came into place, the law was actually amended to say that that zoning needed to stay in place for up to 7 years. It wasn't something that could be just changed if the government changed. So the law, well, I mean, I suppose the government could have changed the law, but it was very clear. And the reason they put this 7-year timeframe in was to give economic certainty and social certainty to all the users and agencies and industries associated with the Great Barrier Reef. So instead of it must be done in every 10 years, the Act actually said it cannot be changed within 7 years. Now that's passed. That zoning plan now can be changed, but it has remained in place since it became law in 2004. So here we are a number of years later, and it's still exactly as it was. And the reason it was done, as I said, it had very clear engagement from a wide range of people. It was very much a compromise. Whilst a lot of the people involved in it were not happy with the outcome, everyone could see how they had been involved. It was a very transparent process. That's something else I think that helps the political longevity. I'll leave it there. That's a bit of a ramble from me. I apologize. And again, I'll ensure that the PowerPoint is circulated to all the participants, and I'm happy to answer any questions in the panel. Thanks, Jabal.
Thank you, John. No worries at all about the presentation. We all know Zoom can be mischievous. We learned that during the pandemic, but I think you were very clear with your points. I think everyone got them, the key messages. So that was very well done, and we really appreciate you taking the time to present on the Great Barrier Reef. If you have any questions for John, please post in the chat. I see the chat is very lively, and also we tried to get to during the panel discussion as well, which is the next segment we are moving to. So John and Willie will be joined by our very special panelists. First off will be Governor Leon Guerrero, who we are very honored to have from Guam. She is the 9th governor of Guam. She is the first female governor of the territory and is a registered nurse, a businesswoman, a policymaker, a mother, and a grandmother. Since taking office in January 2019, she's nearly eliminated Guam's deficit from 83 million to 1.5 million. So that just goes to show how effective a politician she is, and she's going to give that political perspective on the panel for us. She's one of our GRISPA leaders, a strong advocate for island issues globally, and a proud champion of the local 2030 Islands Network Initiative. It is an absolute honor and pleasure for her to join us in the event and what is an early morning in Guam, so welcome, Governor. Our next panelist joining us is Anne-Claire Gourant, who is the project manager for the Climate Change and Environmental Sustainability Program at the SPC, the Pacific Community. She was formerly and for a few years in charge of multilateral cooperation for the government in New Caledonia. She worked in New Caledonia for a number of years in a number of different roles in the Southern Province as well. Throughout her different functions, she has gone through several government cycles and has a wealth of experience to share on weathering conservation projects through governance uncertainty. So a very welcome perspective on the panel as well. So welcome, Anne-Claire. And I think I want to start with you, as you're the only practitioner on our panel who did not get an opportunity to present beforehand. As I mentioned in your introduction, you're well experienced in a number of roles, management roles in New Caledonia. Based on what you have heard from our presenters so far, I want to just get an idea of how much their insights resonate with your own experience, as well as what may have been different or unique for your own context and why.
Thank you very much, Jabal, and hi everybody. So first of all, I really want to thank you for inviting me to attend this very interesting discussion, and thank you for the speakers for their very rich and concrete presentation on the project they are working on. So as Willie and John said, indeed, island success is built upon initiatives that work. But as every project or story, it's not working in a linear manner. And many events can boost or slow down the implementation of initiative. And I really think that in New Caledonia, as everywhere, during, as Willie shows us, during positive political context, conservationists and managers have to accelerate the implementation of action and secure the rules and networks, pillar and basis. And it was the case in New Caledonia when the government and local authorities were very responsive on the international context around ocean, which allow us to have our lagoon listed as a World Heritage Site in 2008 and created in 2014 the Natural Park of Coral Sea and now all EZ. But at the same time, and it is something that has really been shown by Willie, the regional context was really helpful. And for example, the support from the Pacific Island Forum or the censorship agreement with Cook Island or the MOU we signed with Australia was this regional context pushed the local policy leaders to be active in this topic. So committing to conservation necessarily implies several functional and structural reforms, and that can impact all sectors. And so even, and John said that very well, if it takes a lot of time to design and have the endorsement of an MPA, this is often just the beginning of the story. And one established and legally designed, designated. So the real question is how can we deal with the uncertainty of governance in this domain? And I think that governance uncertainty can impact initiative at all scale. For example, in New Caledonia, it was a case in the design and management of a very small underwater pass I was in charge of. till a very large scale, for example, the natural park of the Coral Sea, but also at international scales. And the main one is the US election and the US withdrawal from the Paris Agreement, which is something very obvious. And so I do not think that New Caledonia context is very different or unique. We have to consider at each scale a natural component, history, social component, economic situation, which are unique to each place. And we have also to consider the regional and international context, which are shared by many countries and can really mitigate the governance risk. And just to finish, I think it's something that really shows that leadership has to stay in the hand of leaders. And I think that it's perhaps a mistake, or perhaps at least a miscalculation, to build conservation program managed by large international organizations and NGOs instead of local communities of our leaders. It's because it's hardly sustainable and do not build a sense of ownership. So this kind of situation may occur in seeds. And I think as a conservationist community, we really have to put the leaders at the forefront of the conservation initiative and policy. Thank you very much, Jabal.
Thanks, Anne-Claire. And I agree with you totally. Community ownership is key. I think it's easy to say, difficult to actually do, but yeah, nothing grows without that rooted in community ownership. Governor Leon, I turn to you now. A similar question, in your experience, how relevant these insights being shared by the practitioners are to you? So some of the lessons they've learned as well, like engaging decision makers early, setting realistic timelines, not raising false expectations. How relevant are these insights? Would you care to elaborate further on what else practitioners could do, or maybe add something that wasn't mentioned?
Yes, thank you. And I don't know the time differences throughout, but here in Guam, I just want to say good morning. And for those in the afternoon zone, good afternoon. Those in the evening zone, good evening. But isn't that just beautiful that we all come together, even during very, very large time differences? And it's because we are all very committed into making our oceans, our lands, and of course our air clean and better for our future generations' livelihood. I want to thank you for inviting me on this panel. I just want to say that every panel presenter that came on is very relevant. I so much connected to what John was saying in terms of politics, public engagement, having clear objectives, clear legislation, and also how to persuade decision makers, right? For me as governor, when I am presented with a proposal or an initiative or a program, what I look for is what is the science behind it? What is the data that supports it? You know, what are the rules and regulations and laws that we already have? And does it meet and align with my principles and my philosophies and my values, and not just mine, but the values of our people and the principles of our people in relation to protecting the waters, the land, air, and even our culture and our traditions and our practices and our economy and just the whole day-to-day life situations. How does that align in making our lives better tomorrow, the next day, the day after, and on towards the future for ourselves, our children, and their children? So as a decision maker, I look at that, but I'll let you know that the simpler the proposal is, the better that it can be understood. And if you come in thinking, oh, I'm going to impress the governor by using big words that I don't understand. And I'll tell you, if I don't understand it, majority of our people don't understand it. So the key here, what I'm trying to point out is, how do we communicate that, right? How do we message out there? One of the things that Laura was talking about is how do we maintain and continue on the work that previous administrations have done in the area of conservation, preservation, and so forth. For me, the bottom line is, like John said, public engagement and also policies that continue on. But as long as your community, our community, is educated about, hey, why are we doing this? How is it going to benefit me? How is it going to benefit my children? Make it very personal. Make it like, how will it affect my pocketbook kind of strategy. And I think if we get that down, we will have buy-in, because really the end goal, right, is to educate our people, so they're the ones that carry the torch on down to the ongoing expanding finish line. So I'm just relaying, being on the other side of the table, is what do I look for in a proposal? And how is it going to benefit my people, my island? I also want to say very much that the relevance of what John said in terms of look at federal partners, look at state partners. You know, the US has a really big, complicated organizational structure, right? We are a US territory, and sometimes we fall under their laws. Sometimes they don't consider us at all. They've either forgotten us or they just don't know the territory of Guam. So one of my biggest strategy is, in any opportunity, John, national level, federal level, the world level, I make our case. So we've been to the federal government, we've been to the United Nations, we are connected to the World Health Organization. We're connected throughout all the financial institutions. So it really is about networking. It's about seeing what your island has. How do we improve those policies? What are the values and principles? And then look around our region, right? Who do we partner with? We partner with Palau, the FSM, the RMI, CNMI, through many networking conferences. And this is one of them. And also on our local level, I especially appreciate the work of Wheatley, because he has grown that endowment. And as a result of that, we are able to have grants and scholarships, like he has said. It's education, it's training, it's networking. We all know that. We do that every day, right? I don't have a magic bullet or, you know, a secret armament. Just every day looking and being flexible, being seamless, and understanding where the people are coming from.
Thank you, Governor. So well put. I think the key message there is that every politician at the end of the day is accountable to the people that put them there. So if you convince the people, you convince the politician. And we have to make sure our messaging is geared towards people understanding what it is you're trying to do. Question now for Willie. Well, I don't think John got to making this point in his presentation, but I saw it in his slides. There are obvious, he noted an important caveat in his slides, which we will share with you all after this event. There are obvious differences between a well-resourced program undertaken in a first world country compared to the circumstances of less developed nations or smaller and developing country. So in your view, Willie, how much does the lack of resources and capacity complicate political transitions even further? is the need to consistently seek external donor support, a different type of political dance in itself? Are there separate cycles you have to manage because of that? Just your thoughts on this.
Yes, thank you, Jabal. You know, I think what we lack in resources, we make up for in innovation. And this is why we came together as a region. Instead of, you know, FSM trying to do things on their own or Guam trying to do things on their own, we come together. And there's power in coming together. And that's when you get the international organizations to recognize the importance of your region. We, you know, when actually the idea of the 30 and 20% was Fiji came up with that idea, but they came up with it and they wanted to run it alone. And what we did was separately, we went and we joined together with 5 jurisdictions in Micronesia, and then we took unfortunately, we took the wind out of their sail, and then everybody came to us, and unfortunately for them, but fortunately for us. So that's what you want to do, is stick together when you are small countries. And the funding goes a long way here. What you might, you know, $5,000 grant to a community makes a big difference in the Pacific.
Thanks, buddy. Strength in numbers. Question for you now, John. You mentioned in your presentation the interplay between federal politics, state, local, and other sectoral politics. And I found that very interesting. At the risk of being simplistic, in a clash of priorities between the three, who wields the most influence in determining the zoning of the barrier reef? Is there an imbalance in influence between the three? Does the federal bully the others, or how dangerous is this to the public interest in terms of maintaining sound scientific underpinning?
Well, as I mentioned in my presentation, there is a intergovernmental agreement between the federal and the state government, which helps in many instances. Not all. There are times when they have different views, but the short answer is that federal politics is by far the most significant in terms of the Great Barrier Reef. It's the overarching legislation, the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Act that I mentioned. It's a World Heritage Site for which the federal government is responsible. So I want to stress that each of those levels of politics, and even the sectoral politics within individual sectors, these are all important aspects. And if it comes down to it, for example, if there's a difference between state and federal legislation, then the federal legislation does predominate. But generally they work through the intergovernmental agreement approach and sort things out. But if it really comes down to it, then the federal one does take the main running. There's also some clearly, you know, some locations where for various reasons, whether it's a marginal electoral seat or something, or some sectors that are more influential politically. So, you know, I don't think we should kid ourselves. This isn't all perfect. There are times when certain groups politically have a lot more influence, but at the end of the day, the legislation is the thing that drives how decisions should be made and are generally made. And as the governor indicated, when legislators and decision makers are looking at things, they refer initially to the legislation and then, you know, policy if it's in place. So I think that's hopefully answers your question, Jabal.
Yes, it does indeed. Moving on back to Anne-Claire. Well, I've worked in a government situation before, so I think like you kind of sense when the winds of change is coming, like if a government is unpopular or not, and you kind of know in advance when things a party might change. And so in anticipating this change and preparing the transition as a practitioner, I mean, publicly you can't do anything about it, but what is actually under the control of sites managers and can be secured, and how do you secure your legacy knowing that somebody new is going to come in, and what is totally out of your hands?
Thank you, Jabal, for your question. And when you are working on a conservation site, I think you are using logical frameworks, and these logical frameworks take into account the risk and try to include some means to mitigate this risk. But governance uncertainty, as you said, is a risk which is not enough taken into account. And as presented by John, this political factor is, I think, the most significant factor. So, as you said, it's quite impossible to evaluate the precise risk that can occur in the future. New election, a pandemic, a war, a political agreement, or disaster. And so, and it will influence the way the leaders are managing the public finance or priorities, and this is just normal. But there are some means that can strengthen the initiative and mitigate the possible impact linked to the governance uncertainty. And as said by John, I think that a sound organizational structure and a very strong governance is something very important. And for example, for the Coral Sea Nature Park, we have a management committee which is divided in 4 groups of actors. So which include local government, private sectors, NGOs, customary leaders. And so this balance between all these actors is a very powerful tool to have ongoing support to the management of the Coral Sea Marine Park. And there is also a scientific committee which can bring, as said by the governors, enough data to have the scientific evidence of all the decisions which are proposed and endorsed. And I think that the effective public engagement can be perhaps secure through a mandatory tool that are included in the policy or the Management Act, so that they are difficult to repeal. And it can be, for example, mandatory consultation of stakeholders for any modification of boundaries or management rules. And I think also there is a strong environmental tool. The fact that if management plan or rezoning process are endorsed in the national law, we have to put along this endorsement the principle of non-regression. So you cannot do less than what has been endorsed before. And this can be included at the higher level of the law in a country. Political support is something also very important. And as the governor said, it needs awareness action. It can be built by beginning at a small scale, which can demonstrate quick and visible effect of MPA, and which will make leaders be confident in the efficiency of MPAs. And as Willie said, also the long-term funding with diverse funding sources let the project be less reliable on one unique partner. So this is something very important. And as Willie said, also, we have to be creative to have a strong financial long-term support. And the example of the Palau green fees is a very good one. And to finish, I think that perhaps the strongest one is the international and regional commitment. Because if a conservation action, for example, large-scale MPA, is established and linked to a regional framework or an international commitment as a UNESCO site or ocean commitments, NDC, Ramsar site, it acquired a kind of official status outside of the countries, and in a way, a reputation and a commitment beyond the borders. Even if it's a non-legally binding commitment, the fact that the country has established a conservation measure that is known to all make it very difficult to go back or give up. And these tools and experience, I think also the establishing the regional park with more than one country is also a very good tool to maintain a dynamic management as a Micronesian challenge. And so I think it's really important that as practitioners, we can share all these tools that so that we can build on what is working to conserve and sustainably utilize our invaluable natural resources. Thank you, Jabal.
Thank you. And Governor Guerrero, I want to ask you more the flip side of this question. Even though I have an idea, I think I know the answer already based on your engagement style. But the winds are changing. You know you're going to be inheriting the government. Elections polls are looking good. So you have an idea of what portfolios are going to be taken up. How do you decide, like, beforehand, like, okay, this might need to go, this will be on the chopping block, how I'm going to stamp my authority on these things I'm about to inherit, or are you more engaging in terms of deciding what's to be done after you inherit? Like, what's the balance between getting action done immediately or finding out what's the real story behind anything you're inheriting and whether to decide what to continue or not? How do you balance that?
I think, Jabal, you need to know all the information before you actually make the decision, right? When I came into office, our finances were not very good. And I knew that first I had to stabilize our finances. I inherited an $84 million deficit. And I'll tell you, through fiscal discipline and empowering your people, we retired that deficit in 2 years under a pandemic when our economy was zero with tourism. And so the impossible can be done. I just think it's who your people are. Surround yourself with good, competent leaders that you trust and are aligned with your politics. So I inherited, I went from it went from a Republican administration to now a Democratic administration. But the key also is I worked very well with my federal partners. And I just wanted to mention this, which I think is very important. So we have a global group, right? We have a regional group, which is the Micronesian Challenge. Micronesian Challenge came out and said, okay, in 2030, you have to have 50% conservation of your marine and 30% terrestrial. So how do I take that and apply that locally, right? So what we did locally is we stood up a Center for Sustainability in the University of Guam. I said the University of Guam is the key place to put it because it's where research, debate, science, data, and so forth comes from, right? So then we took the United States sustainability goals and turned that into our goals, and using the Micronesian Challenge as a driver also to our goals. So we weaved the international, the regional, and to the local. And we developed a program called Guam Green Growth, the G3s. And what that is, that's our group. I took our partners from the private sector, stakeholders of about 100 people, and we broke it up into little task forces and workshops, and they each came out with their goals and their strategic actions. And we meet regularly. That's really under the championing by my Lieutenant Governor, Josh Tenorio, who is a member of the steering committee of GLSPA. So in all those changes, how do you take what previous and make the necessary changes? I think you need to also figure out, are you making progress, and are changes being made? And you use metrics for that. That's what our 3G people have. They also worked with Hawaii to develop a dashboard so that we can just look and see if our objectives are being met. It's complicated, but it's something that we figured out, right? And, you know, who knows, the next administration might have a better kind of ideas and strategies, but I placed all that work in agencies with people whose jobs will not change with even administrative leadership changes. Yeah.
Thank you. And I'll just make a shameless plug here. All that great initiative stuff you're talking about with the G3 and the dashboard, a lot of that is being shared through our local 2030 Islands network. So check it out. I think Paul will put the link in the chat. We need more islands to join to follow this same type of model to localize and make relevant the UN Sustainable Development Goals in your own particular island context. My next question for Willie now, speaking about budgets and turning deficits into surpluses, the cost of conservation, how does it sit, because it's so long term, how does it sit with government budgets and economic streams? What are the most critical costs associated with large scale conservation? And is there any economy, well, you spoke to this, economies of scale. How do you bridge the investment needs and maintain the minimum funding while securing mid to long term secure financing mechanisms?
Thank you, Jabal. So again, I talked about the development of a sustainable finance plan that we put together in 2012, and the fact that we are, revising that plan so that we can fully understand what the costs are for meeting the commitments that our leaders and the region has put in place. And right now, so we are going to each of the jurisdictions to try to figure out what the budgets are that the governments can contribute to themselves. But we all already know that, the governments have very limited budgets, and they have so many priorities that they need to care for. And so we have to, again, look at a multitude of different financing mechanisms, from looking at the regional level endowment to national funds like the green fees, and then even some of the local. We've helped some of the local conservation sites develop their own conservation easements, develop their own revolving funds, and things like that, to be able to take care of the needs of the work that they are implementing. And yeah, so we're looking at a slew of, and it's not just one source that's going to support the work that we're all doing. It has to be for developing countries like ours with limited resources. We have to have a multitude of financing mechanisms to support our work.
Thank you. Moving on to John, developed country contexts are not one of the management challenges that the Barrier Reef Management Park currently faces. The biggest one over the last 50 years is probably climate change. No one can get away from it. It's definitely the biggest and most existential crisis on our hands right now. And so even after all the incredible political resiliency the park has shown to date, how worried are you about this challenge? Is it a step too far for the park to handle? Or maybe because the problem is so big, it can be a unifier across political viewpoints, and that might result in decision making in the best decision scientifically. Well, what are your thoughts on this?
Thanks, Jamal. Well, as you said, it's unquestionable that climate change is the most significant threat. The government puts out every 5 years a thing called the Outlook Report, and the first one was done in 2009. at that stage, it started talking about climate change. The most recent one in 2019 downgraded the outlook for the Great Barrier Reef from poor to very poor because of a whole slew of pressures, but it was very clear that climate change is the most significant threat. So the fact that it is a global threat is not just impacting the Great Barrier Reef. It's I have a colleague who's looked at all the coral reefs on the World Heritage List. There are 29, and his summation is that under current climate change projections, all those coral reefs will cease to function as effective coral reefs by the end of the century. So this is a huge, as you said, global issue. It needs to be addressed at all levels. So it's not just something for other governments to take on. It has to happen at all levels: national, local, regional, and international. In fact, in Australia, many of the state governments are doing a better job in considering climate change than I think the federal government. So we've had a number of very recent major disasters, which I think are linked to climate change. Some of you may be aware of the huge unprecedented flooding that's just occurred in southeast Queensland and New South Wales, and also the bleaching of the Great Barrier Reef, which has been unprecedented over a number of years. These are clearly linked to climate change. So I can see climate change becoming more and more a political issue at all levels, but particularly for the forthcoming federal election. It remains to be seen whether it becomes a unifier, as you said, Yuval, across all factions. But I think we really need to address, if we're concerned about the future of not only our coral reefs, but all our World Heritage sites, cultural and natural. Do you mind if there was one of my slides that I really overlooked, if I can quickly just jump to it, that I want to talk about in terms of political. Jabal, if you'll give me the ability to quickly talk about that.
Yeah, sure. I was just about to say we probably have time for like a last word from each of you to kind of say what you want to say key before we close this panel discussion. So go ahead.
Okay, well, if I can quickly talk about expectations, I think it's really important when you're engaging politicians and decision makers that you set realistic expectations. You don't promise what you can't deliver. You also set realistic expectations in terms of time horizons, but recognizing that these need to be often revised. And in our case of the Great Barrier Reef rezoning, we thought we could do it within 2 to 3 years. It ended up taking 5 years. So those changes came about because of political changes, but I think it's really important to set realistic expectations. Don't raise false expectations with anyone, whether it's a sector, the community. And I think the issue that we sometimes hear is that we're looking for a win-win. I think the concept of win-win is actually never going to occur in a complex planning issue like the Great Barrier Reef. There are so many different people looking at this from different perspectives that if you give them the false expectation that there's going to be a win-win, I think that's not helping. What you do want to raise is the knowledge that they can all get involved, and you will listen to their concerns and do the best possible compromise. But there's, I think, very rarely win-wins. A couple other very quick things, and I'm sure the governor would agree. The politicians are interested in the views of everyone, not just the noisy minority. They want to hear the views of the silent majority. So you need to work out ways to do that. Again, we did that in the Great Barrier Reef. I haven't got time to go into it. And the last one is the importance of timing and recognizing political windows. And again, in the Great Barrier Reef, we had a huge issue at the end when there was a political window that we had to run to get through. Luckily, we managed to do that, but otherwise we could have lost the whole planning process. So these are just other important aspects of engaging the political support. Thanks, Jabal.
Thanks, John. And quickly on to Anne-Claire, any last words you want to leave with our audience on this topic? You're on mute.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. No, I just want to say that it's very important to have a different kind of objectives. So long-term objective, which are the one for practitioners, for conservation managers, and perhaps sub-objective that can include the lens of our leaders. And so I think that it's very important to provide the evidence of the efficiency of MPA, and some indicators are easy to provide, but some as a mitigation of climate change are much more difficult to provide. And I only think that as GLSPA does, it's very important to have a communication design for political leaders as bright spots. And these kind of messages can be carried in high-level fora and will inspire other leaders. And so having champion sharing success story based on emblematic sites or species, which bring hope for the future generation, is something very important, because we are all very proud to be part of this conservation community, and we are all very committed to this, but this is not the main thing. The main thing is to bring these ideas and this long-term policy to other people, to other leaders, and to expand the people who really think that these conservation tools are very, very important for the sustainability of nature on the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Willie, I want to leave the last word for the governor. So Willie, any last comments?
Thank you, Jabal. You know, I think the thing to continue to do to get support is to actually achieve things on the ground. And when you get results, everybody wants to be on a winning team. And so when you get results, especially when you are involving the constituencies and our scholarship and internship programs are very popular with the leaders. So when they see that we have 100% retainage, where we are not losing anybody when they go get our scholarships to go to school, and they come home and they're running the different departments or agencies that they that everybody wants to see that. So it's very important that you get results. That's the best form of fundraising, and to get everybody to continue to be on your team. Thank you.
I totally agree. And finally, Governor Guerrero, any parting words of advice for our practitioners on how they can ensure that their projects are sustained going forward?
Yes, it's communicate, communicate, communicate. And also, you know, no one mentioned this, but be a friend of the media and use the media to our advantage, because that's pretty powerful, I think. Also, know all your platforms of communication, social media, traditional media, print media, all sorts of just inundate and saturate all those platforms. And then lastly, know who your influencers are and work with them, because they can be just as powerful and impactful in moving your message forward. So, I agreed with everyone that have spoken. I am so much blessed, I think, to be able to share and know the information from the various islands, various countries. And thank you so much, GLSPA, for putting this very impactful, I think, very informative, hour and a half with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. It was truly a pleasure having you on our panel and sharing such great insights. All right, so how we usually end off these events, we get a very special guest to come in and sort of reflect on what he's heard throughout the entire night, morning, evening, depending on where you are, of course. So I'm very pleased to introduce the Honorable Vincent Wheatley. He is the Minister of Natural Resources, Labour and Immigration for the British Virgin Islands. back home, he's known as the get it done man, and he has brought that same energy and infectious enthusiasm in his role as a GLSPA leader for us. For the Honorable Minister, politics is about service to people. And I'm sure a lot of what he's heard today in this event will have resonated deeply on a personal level for him. And I look forward to hearing how he summarizes the lessons learned in his own inimitable way. So, Honorable Minister, please take the floor.
Thank you, Jamal. It's been such a fascinating hour and a half just listening to the various conversations. I think the one that moved me highly was the governor, Governor Leon Guerrero. I think you really hit the nail on the head in terms of the best way to engage the political class, so to speak, the political electorate, persons like myself who are elected. And someone has mentioned something, the concept of legacy. It should be borne in mind. I was kind of surprised that the person mentioned legacy, because legacy is normally associated, from my perspective, with the elected person, not the public officers. So I found it quite interesting. Somebody asked, well, what about my legacy? I'm the public officer carrying out this study. I'm doing the research on the reef. What is my legacy? What the governor said, it's true. Politicians listen to the persons who elected them. And it is important that I don't know how, I mean, every country has a different structure as to how the electorate relate to the elected persons. In the BVI, we are very open, very accessible. In some countries, it is not so. So a lot of my staff interact with me directly. The person who you may see treating stony coral disease, the person you may see scuba diving, that person who may sit next to me an hour from them. So I'm in direct contact with the persons who are doing these various things. Now, influencers, social media, all elected persons, policymakers want to be popular. So buy-in is very important. We also saw the quiet minority, or the loud minority, or the quiet majority. We have to listen to both. Doing the popular thing and doing the right thing sometimes, and the governor again spoke to that, it's a funny balance. You know, in getting the buy-in of the minister with projects that are impactful. All elected persons want to leave legacies also. So if you're a practitioner out in the field, whether it be on the reef, like John or something, if you could get the elected person to get buy-in and champion that for you in the media and the social media platforms, it puts you now on the spotlight also. And any good elected person are going to give you the credit for the work to some extent, I must add. So it's a relationship you forge. And then the reality is elections do happen and sometimes ministers change. It's very important that you take the time to try and study and understand the ministers or the person running for elections so you could understand their perspectives and what they might bring to the elected office of which you may be a part. In my case, I have a science background, a mathematics background. So science is not new to me. I appreciate science. I'm also at heart a conservationist. So I have a natural appreciation for certain things. So climate change, I didn't need to be sold on climate change. When I came in, I advanced the climate change causes and popularized them among persons because it was a global trend. I saw it was going to be the global trend. I haven't been through Hurricanes Irma and Maria, the two first Category 5 hurricanes. I have direct experience of climate change, so to speak. But in my particular case, so it's always very important that if you try to bridge the gap between the practitioners and the policymakers, that you get to have a general idea of who the policymakers might be. Understand what your ambitions are. Again, like the governor said, the key of alignment. It has been plaguing us for some time now because when persons change and kind of the political climate change, what is there to you as a professional may be very different to the political directorate at the time. That's why it is so important to always be aligned. And the governor wouldn't say it, but I would say, sometimes if you find what you are trying to do doesn't align with the political directorate, you may want to remove yourself from that situation for that period of time. You will have no fun, you will feel no fulfillment in the job because the political director is going in one direction and you are trying to go in another direction. So trying to find that middle ground, again, can be very, very tricky. This has been fascinating. I didn't even realize that you had these kind of forums where this topic, I think we need more of these kind of forums where this particular kind of topic is discussed, because I've seen it can cause a lot of problems with elected persons trying to carry out a mandate that is supposed to be for the public, but the public officers have a different idea. I don't think sometimes it's what should be done, but more how we go about it. So again, it was just fascinating listening to your perspectives and your insights. That I think once we can understand that, all of us will feel more fulfilled as we carry out our roles. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Honorable Minister. Very well put. And so that's our show. Thank you all for joining. A very, very special thank you again to our partners on this event, UNDP SGP program, Blue Nature Alliance, governments of Guam and British Virgin Islands, Micronesia Conservation Trust. We really, really appreciate SPC, you're participating, the views of the panelists, and it was, I think, yeah, as the minister said, it was really, really interesting, and we need to have more discussions like this. So thank you all. This recording will be on our website. We will have follow-up. We have events throughout the year. Look out, Bright Spots events. And thank you. I hope you all enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you
Bye,
very
everyone.
much for the inspiring talk. Thank you.
You all stay safe.